Hi, I'm Jeannie Lauren Dowden with Conduit News, and today we have Representative Brit McKenzie joining us to give us his impression of session. Representative McKenzie comes out of the 7th District here in Northwest Arkansas. Hi, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jenny.
Absolutely. Well, I really want to talk to you about several bills that you ran this session. A lot of them were heavy hitters, met with a lot of opposition, honestly. So just first want to get your overall impression of the session. This was your second term down there at the Capitol. Just give us your thoughts.
So it was a good session in terms of setting out priorities and accomplishing priorities. For me and the priorities that I like to drive, there's still stuff left on the table. That's what happens. And I got further in some of these larger principled arguments and bills that I filed, and some that are still on the launch pad. So in total, it was a good session, but there are also still some significant things left out. I've tried to make a commitment to my constituents that every time I go down to Little Rock to represent them, I want to try to bring back some kind of substantive tax cut. We were able to repeal the state portion of the grocery tax this year that was led by Representative Underwood, which was a massive success with bipartisan support. But we don't have another income tax to speak of as of right now. So I'm very assured with the work that we did, but there's still always more work we could do.
Absolutely. One piece of legislation that sticks out to me, particularly that you filed, was, of course, a private property rights bill. It was your short-term rental. We talked about that a lot at Conduit. You originally filed House Bill 1445, and that protected the private property rights of Arkansans who use their homes for short-term rentals. Talk about just the lifespan of this legislation at the Capitol. You originally filed that bill. It died in committee on a roll call vote. You then filed another bill. That was kind of a compromise bill, but just give our viewers, just update them on what happened and really how that played out at the Capitol over the session.
Yeah. So HB 1445 was the initial short-term rental legislation that we filed. It was almost an exact replica of what we filed in the 94th General Assembly, which was very clear and affirmed basic property rights in the state of Arkansas under the guise of Section 2 of the Arkansas Constitution, that the right to privacy is above all other commercial rights. We were really proud of that bill. We brought it to the floor. We got it out of the House City County Local Committee that I sit on. And then we did a nose count, and then we heard of vast opposition on the floor. So also in concert with that bill was supposed to come onto the floor on a Thursday. My fifth child was born that Saturday. My wife went into labor shortly after a committee Thursday morning. So I went back to Northwest Arkansas and pulled the bill off the agenda for that day. I was able to spend some time with my family and with my newborn, and then came back and reassessed where we were with whip count. That is when we decided, myself and my Senate sponsor, Senator Josh Bryant, that we wanted to try to achieve some compromise. We had worked with some of the stakeholders in Little Rock, some of the special interests who had vehement opposition on the bill for the last 3 years. For one last attempt, there was good faith work to try to drive some clarity and achieve a piece of legislation that didn't offend the principles that we were hoping for, which is secure those basic property rights and not let municipal governments have onerous regulations and pick winners and losers, whether it's an individual's single family dwelling or the hospitality outlets that they call home in their small towns all across the state of Arkansas, as well as allow for some of those police powers and regulatory abilities by those municipalities. Yeah. We thought we had achieved great compromise. We thought we would bring some of those folks on the other side into the tent, and it didn't prevail. So politics is the art of the possible. I'm fully aware of that. It's been a great endeavor to try to lead this legislation in the House. I'm very thankful to my Senate sponsor, Senator Bryant. We're very, very aligned on this issue, and I don't suspect we'll be done with it. This version of the bill may change, and we may, if we come back in the 96th Assembly, address it a different way. But it's been great. It's been an eye-opening experience here from people all over the state, not just my own constituents, that municipalities and localities across the state are trying to treat the definition of property rights differently, and they're trying to say that a home without a certain number of windows or a certain height of a window or a certain width of a driveway does not constitute as the same type of property that your neighbor may have, and that's unjust and that's unright. So not right, and we're trying to do the best we can through legislation to resolve it.
I think what was surprising to me, it's not surprising to know that, all of these different special interest groups, the Mayor's Association, Municipal League, that they are coming out obviously against the bill. I think what caught me off guard the most was your own House members of the Republican Party, working actively against the bill. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are we all have a constituency we have to represent. And I don't agree with anybody for having to do what's best for the constituents that send them to Little Rock. We are a republic. We are the electors that elect the laws that they send to our state government to do that. And we have different priorities, especially when it comes to the legislation that we want to advocate for while we're in Little Rock. For me and my folks in Eastern Benton County who made a choice to not live in an incorporated city, we don't want to see the amazing and awesome growth that we're seeing in Northwest Arkansas that we'd hope to replicate all across the state turn into city governments or municipal governments having too much purview over our own property rights that that we own, that we pay,
Yeah.
we pay property taxes on. And I don't aggrieve anybody from any other part of the state for having to advocate for what they think is right. I do go back to our RPA platform. As it stands, members of the Republican Party, property rights are a guaranteed right that is given to us by God, that is only affirmed by government. So I can understand where people come from. We just can respectfully disagree on that issue.
Another issue that you brought up, policy was, I watched this the very last day of session, and it was, I believe, House Bill 1662, prohibited lobbying for a foreign entity. You did a really wonderful job getting this through the House, and a lot of House members were in support of this. It went over to the Senate, I think, to the surprise of many. It could not get through. It failed, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, 3 different times. The Senate sponsor there was Senator Blake Johnson, majority leader there in the Senate. And there on the final, I believe it was the final day of session, they expunged the vote multiple times and it just failed. And I think the irony of this, and this is complete speculation, but and I've had people on Conduit say, lobbyists were very influential in making sure that this bill was killed, and it is a bill prohibiting lobbying for a foreign entity, specifically, China and Russia. Tell me why you felt the need to file this bill and your thoughts on the fact that a conservative legislature could not get something like this passed.
Yes. So I was thankful that the governor's office asked me to lead this legislation with Senator Johnson. It was a part of her broader protecting the natural state platform where we had various pieces of legislation specific to the auspice of the encroachment
Yeah.
in the People's Republic of China. I had run previous legislation apropos of not of a governor's packet, but an issue I was really concerned about in the 94th General Assembly relative to drones made by a Chinese military company. And so there was some synergy there, and they asked me to take up the lead. I, like yourself, Jenny, thought it was a pretty common sense piece of legislation. I was also, and I use the term gobsmacked by the fact that the bill, not for lack of the leadership in the Senate with Senator Hester and Senator Johnson and Senator Dees all working tirelessly to make sure that that bill was, brought back up so we could at least try to have common sense prevail. My previous statements about people needing to represent their districts and representing their communities and potentially their mayors, take that aside. No one in the state of Arkansas represents Beijing. But yet we had several senators that decided to cast their vote in alignment with Beijing this year, and it's anathema to me. I don't understand. There were special interests at play, and I won't comment too deeply on that. But this is a good piece of legislation that was left on the cutting room floor because personalities and politics got in the way of needing to protect our people.
Do you think that this will be a vote that some legislators will come to regret come primary season?
uh, everyone's got to answer to their folks back home. This one is a pretty clear piece of legislation that, the halls of our state capitol, the marble palace that people refer to it as, we can have a lot of special interests that crawl through that place, and we can have a lot of individuals that lobby us for different issues or contracts or whatever. I would hope that we could all have agreed that the People's Republic of China and the CCP didn't have the same opportunity to lobby us as legislators, and they're going to have to answer that most likely in this upcoming cycle.
Another really good bill that Conduit supported that also had to do with lobbying was House Joint Resolution 1006, and it would have stopped taxpayer-funded government lobbying. Another really good, just common sense piece of legislation, and that one actually got nowhere. Talk to us about that one.
So I'll, with full admission, the filing it as a constitutional amendment was meant more to just have a conversation. I've
Sure.
seen this came to me not from an individual constituent, but I've seen other states, specifically in the South, that have taken up this issue, and I thought, let's start the dialogue. Filing a bill is a great way to do that. I knew that there were other constitutional amendments that were very worthy of consideration, and I've made comments publicly about the referral to the ballot initiative. I think as long as it's a tool in our toolbox, it should be very, very held tightly to the people. So I respect that some of those other ones made it out, and I was very happy to support them. I was also very happy to take that bill and file it as a regular House bill so that we can continue the conversation and see if the committee that decided to not advance my constitutional amendment would
Yeah.
at least consider it as a House bill. It did not clear that committee. I've kind of gotten a habit of, on some of these bigger issues, they like to languish in the committees, and a few of these have died there. But it's important, and the comments I made during committee are still true to this day, that I think that lobbying is a protected political speech. I've have a lot of experience working in political speech and paid political organization and operations. And I don't ever want to limit anyone's access or ability to it. What I don't agree with is the conscription of tax dollars for the purposes of having legislation work against the citizenry that elect either that local official or elect that school board or whomever else, whatever other political subdivision that exists, working against their citizens through conscripted tax dollars. I think that's again not the intention of the multi-cameral process we have set up. It should be that citizens have recourse to appeal to their government, either that through the ballot or through the ballot in their elected officials. And then they should be able to politically voice the issues they have and the legislation they'd like to see carried and passed. Paying into a larger organization that then uses influence peddling or personalities to help gain political favor, I don't think should take place. So that was a bill I was very happy to file as a constitutional amendment. Also very happy to file it as a House bill. I'm not sure where that one is, where it will end up in the next session, but it was a fight I was willing to have.
Okay, another one that got a lot of attention and engagement on our social media platforms was your House Bill 1867, the No Government Trespassing Act. This bill would have prohibited game wardens from entering private land without permission. I know that you withdrew this bill in the end, but I think there weren't many bills that got so much just public comment and reactions on our Facebook the way this bill did. So my question would be to you, I think just what made you file this bill in the first place? How did we get here? And a lot of people commented, why do game wardens think, rightly or wrongly, that the Fourth Amendment does not apply to them? And not that's not an accusatory, question, but just how do we get here, and why was there even a need to even file that bill to have that conversation in the first place?
So that bill is the open fields doctrine is something I have been looking at for
Yes.
a very long time, since even my first election into the legislature. It's been surprising to me that a law enforcement agency has an additional power or responsibility separate and not equal to any other law enforcement. And as you just kind of investigate open fields, and I won't bore your audience, but it's common law definition through Black's legal definition, or Black's legal, through Black's legal documents. What it does is it asserts that because a game warden has the ability to check on, again, through common law, the king's land, the king's water, or the king's game, they should be able to access individuals' private property to monitor and observe those things. Well, we live in a democracy. We live in a constitutional republic. We have no king, and therefore to hang a practice on a common law practice, which exists in, I think, 40 something other states, I think as Arkansans, we should really evaluate if that's at the betterment of our people. So initially I had this bill in the pre-filing period, and I worked with several other House members. And as we've gone through the list, I've had a few other kind of larger bills and pieces of legislation that I need to tend to. I'm not saying this wasn't a high priority. It was a high priority, but I wanted to commit the right amount of time and effort into it. So I worked with other legislators, and some of them took the ball and ran with it, especially while I was running my private property rights and my lobbying reforms. And then as I had a child in the middle of session, and when I returned and really got back into clearing my capacity, we had not gotten very far in terms of negotiating or working with the Game and Fish Commission and the Game and Fish Law Enforcement Division on what would be a suitable compromise. And so I decided to just file my original bill. I do want to take a moment to say I appreciate Colonel Young and everybody and all of the law enforcement and game warden officers at Arkansas Game and Fish. They do tremendous work. And filing this bill was never meant to be an indictment on their work and how important the work they do is. And the cross collaboration they do with law enforcement agencies all across the natural state to help with things outside of game and fish investigations. The bill was meant to help invoke a very serious conversation about what can we see change without changing the legislation, without changing our code. And the Game and Fish did, and I believe that information should be coming out some point in May. They did change their standard operating procedure to go from there's no reason at all for them to be able to enter into private property to they now at least need a articulable reason, meaning someone will have to put their name to a accusation as to poaching or desecration of a state land or water in order to enter into that property. So is it the same as a reasonable suspicion of a crime? No, but it's a step forward in that Game and Fish is going to be having a higher bar to clear in order to enter someone's property without a warrant. So I appreciate the Colonel and his work on this. I think we've gotten to a place where no one feels really comfortable and happy, but for true progress to be made, people kind of have to leave the table feeling like they didn't get the best deal possible. So I'm thankful for where it's the No Government Trespass Act, the conversation it created, and then where we ultimately landed. And if it needs to be brought up again in the future, I would look forward to seeing empirical data about those articulable reasons why people enter into property without a warrant.
So their new standard of operation will still allow them to go on a property without a warrant? It'll still trump that? Correct.
So as of right now, there are different levels of scrutiny. So it's no reason at all, articulable reason, and articulable suspicion of a crime. Those are technically the three reasons that would lead to a probable cause in order for a case to be made in front of a magistrate judge, a district judge, so that a warrant could be signed. So we went from, if it's a kind of a funnel, 0 being what we currently are at, to total probable cause and investigation and an indictment being given. We are one step away from no reason at all. And I appreciate that. I don't know. And again, politics is the art of the possible. Would I have had success ultimately getting that bill to the governor's desk? I don't know this year. But I do know that I had a willing participant on the other side of the table who's going to hold his game wardens to a higher standard, and asking me and the other legislators who worked on this bill the opportunity to give him a chance to see a substantive change in the way that they conduct their business and investigation. So I'm looking forward to seeing the outcomes of that change in standard operating procedure.
Yeah. Was there opposition, or did the Game and Fish Foundation lobby against this, or just was it, um, just was there opposition to it, or did you just not have the capacity and the time?
There was opposition to it. There was some opposition to it. And in terms of the individual groups, I won't go into all of them. There were some national organizations,
Okay.
some conservation organizations, but at the end of the day, I'm an avid outdoorsman. I'm an avid hunter, and by virtue of that, and the taxes and fees that I pay, I'm a conservationist as well. I don't think we need to hand over all elements of privacy and personal property rights in order to protect the game and
Yeah.
land that
I
we
get,
care so much about. So
yeah.
there was opposition, not to the same level as some of the other bills I filed, but there was some organized opposition.
I know you're racking up you're racking up the opposition. I guess one would have to argue, wonder why anyone would be opposed to the protections already offered in our Bill of Rights. But, that's who am I to say who that might be? Okay, what else do I want to ask you about? You really did have some hard-hitting legislation this session, Representative McKenzie. You really didn't shy away from it at all. You were co-chair of House Education, which is it's one of the more important committees there at the Capitol. Reflecting back on the session, what were some of the most important pieces of policy that you saw come through committee?
Yeah, so this year was a little bit different. This is my second term on the House Education Committee, my first in a leadership position on that committee. Last session, we obviously passed LEARNS, which universal
Yeah.
school choice. And after spending time in this space and working from a policy standpoint, we have the most universal, the most widely accepted school choice program in the country, and something we should be very proud of. This session was much more of a defense of those wonderful
Mm,
ideas and standards. Also, not having gone to the 3 year step to full school choice in our EFA program. So it was much more of making sure we don't defend little small parts that people wanted to knock down within LEARNS. But some bills that came through that I was really proud of. Representative McCollum ran several bills. One specifically had to do with waiver, school choice within waivers and interdistrict denials. That's something that is not maybe not the most headline grabbing policy, but in terms of how it affects students and parents that need to move for whatever reason, we've heard in the last 2 to 5 years that there have been a lot of hangups, and superintendents, for whatever reason, have been deciding to not let interdistrict or intra-district transfers occur. So that was a great piece of legislation. Another bill he ran was recall for school board elections, one that I was proud to support. I ran a piece of legislation that I know several school choice advocates and parental advocates in education have been trying to get across the finish line for several years, relevant to unification of our school board elections.
yes.
And that one was, I think, in the previous 94th General Assembly, got through several layers of the legislative process, but then ultimately died on the House floor about a week before the end of session. I was very happy that we got such overwhelming support in the House and Senate on that bill. Ultimately, we need our school boards elected at the same time as our other nonpartisan municipal races. I'm tired. I'm sure others are tired of having a special election, in a May or a September on a random Tuesday, that ultimately school districts have to pay for, that come out of our tax dollars through millage, and that have appallingly low turnout. So it's
Yeah.
important to ensure that to have votes when voters actually vote. That was a piece of legislation I was very proud to lead this year, and happy we got to the governor's desk for signature.
What about House Bill 1139? That one protected the religious moral education courses without hurting attendance.
Yes.
Did that one make it all the way through?
No, ma'am, it did not.
Okay.
That was a bill I was happy to lead. I thought it would have had great support. We did have support,
Yeah.
not only from communities around the state that are already conducting release time programs, but from others that wanted to have release time
Yeah. That
programs.
was a good one.
It was, and we ultimately took some model legislation and we really winnowed it down to make it as permissive as possible and back into what is a federally protected
Yeah.
right through the Zorlak decision at the United States Supreme Court in the 1950s. We just couldn't clear the House committee process. Every piece of data that I have seen tells me that kids that have some type of moral religious instruction during the school day that does not conflict with a core curriculum or a mandatory learning or testing, they are more attentive, they are less truant, and they have less disciplinary problems. I love to support any legislation that gets kids to come to the classroom, to be more attentive in the classroom, and have less distractions while they're there. So I don't believe I'll be done with that piece of legislation either. That one was very heartwarming to hear from people from all over the state saying,
I bet.
we're trying, we're banging on the door to try to get this organized, and we're not getting the responses we need. But ultimately, I think we'll be able to create that protection for them here soon.
That was a really good one. I bet you also heard from a lot of people on Senate Bill 625. I know that you mentioned just a second ago kind of playing defense now on the LEARNS Act. And a lot of people felt like Senate Bill 625 put a lot of unnecessary restrictions and unnecessary burdens on homeschool families and others who use the LEARNS Act. You were one of the few no votes on the House floor on this bill. Um, Talk to us about Senate Bill 625 and just your overall impression of it. And it was interesting to me. This one just kind of caught me off guard, to be completely honest, especially considering one of the sponsors of this bill was a sponsor of LEARNS.
So Chairman Brooks is my chairman on the House Education Committee. He was the lead
Uh-huh.
sponsor of Senate Bill 625. Not only is he a immense education freedom fighter and has been his entire life prior to being elected, he is, like you mentioned, the author of LEARNS and responsible for why we're here today. What I've learned as a legislator and with people who I consider friends is reasonable people can disagree. And
Yeah.
I understand and I really appreciate Representative Brooks and Senator Davis for amending the bill based on the concerns that they heard from people all across the state and changing those caps and those percentages. And I don't want to speak to their motive or anything like that. My no vote was relative to what I understand to be true, and that we hadn't hit a full universal step yet. We were obviously in the process of the application when the bill was being considered, and I didn't want there to be any intimation that I supported universal school choice, and I wanted to change the limits that we had promised to people.
Okay.
I understand and can appreciate the argument that we want to protect LEARNS, and I want to protect LEARNS, and I want to protect the universal school choice that we fought really hard for in the state of Arkansas. I do just hope that we don't create any type of an arbitrary limit. We had seen some instances of families who were using EFA dollars, maybe not in the benefit of getting their children the best education possible. But ultimately, we gave a promise to the citizens of Arkansas that we want parents to take responsibility and to be in charge of their kids' education. And if they draw down that EFA, then ultimately we should give them a lot of latitude in how they use those dollars. So I did vote against Senate Bill 625, and it's not because I don't have tremendous respect for Chairman Brooks or Senator
Sure.
Davis. We all have to come back home and defend the
Yeah.
votes that we have. And I felt like because of the homeschool families in my district that I didn't want to support legislation that would have ultimately changed the way that they had set themselves up for the following calendar school year.
One other question about education legislation before I let you go. That also a lot of people were talking about online and came to our Facebook page and talked about was the 4-day school week. And that was something that people were very passionate about. And there was just, conversation that maybe those schools would have that taken away, that they wouldn't have the option to have 4-day school weeks anymore. I can't remember if the House Education Committee ever heard legislation about that. I know several bills were filed. I know Representative Puryear filed a bill. Walker did as well. Secretary Oliva sent a letter out to school districts about that. What was your take on that issue?
Yes. So, and Representative Andrews was initially filed the bill that
Yes,
then led
that's
to
right.
Secretary Oliva sending a
That's
letter. And
right.
then
Thank you.
there were the response bills that were filed as well. And,
Thank you.
candidly, it wasn't on my radar until the session began. And then I heard from
Yeah.
constituents saying, not within my district, but just across the state, as we kind of get blind emails, that was a concern for them and to not take it away. And without having kind of a knee-jerk reaction to how I felt about it, I worked with the Department of Education to see the data. I think that school districts should have autonomy, just like how we've asked for parents and students who want to, be a part of a school choice program or draw down an EFA account, we want them to have autonomy in the process. I think that's totally fair. And I think districts should be given that same ability to a certain regard. School districts that are a 4-day school district that have either had languishing or negative test results and assessments, the proof is there. So I would say I believe at the end of the session, we determined there was 44 school districts that did some type of a variation of a 4-day school week. And it was almost like a classic bell curve. 9 or 10 or 11 of them had, what we, as we assess grades to the school districts, a D or an F, and had, tracked down from a D and an F, or tracked from a C to a D and an F as they've gone to a 4-day school week. And then we had around 10 or 15 that were at the front end of the bell curve, where they were increasing their test scores and they were increasing the anecdotals and the qualitative data that says the students and the teachers love the 4-day work week, and they're also performing better. And then there was a languishing middle that nothing had changed. Substantively, nothing had changed. And I would have to say that if nothing has changed and you've changed the calendar, then you kind of need to get lumped with the far side of that bell curve, which is if you're not growing, you're dying, or if you're not increasing, you're stagnating. So my belief is that I don't want to conscript kids into school 5 days a week, 50 weeks out of the year. I think that there needs to be that natural ebb and flow and in season and out of season of school. That's how we get the best results out of children, and how we get them to pay attention to the work that we're putting in front of them. That being said, the students aren't the ones making the decisions, administrators are. So if administrators are doing it to have a competitive advantage for hiring practices or for negotiating down the total cost of a contract, I don't believe that to be a good use or practice of those school districts. If you can show to me empirically and data driven that we're moving to a 4-day school week, we're retaining more of our teachers, we're able to pay them less ostensibly because of the number of weeks in a contract calendar year, and we're seeing that growth that we need in our community, then mazel tov. Great, good success. If you're saying it just works best because people have a case of the grumpies on Friday, I'm sorry, but I'd like for you to be our tax dollars that we're sending not only from the state, but from local millages to go into the classroom to educate our children, to prepare them for the world outside. I get the grumpies too, but it's not a reason enough to just cancel a full day of school.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. All right. Before we move into primaries, MVP of this legislative session there in the House, in your opinion, who would that be?
MVP. That's a great question. I will say that Representative Underwood has ran a lot of several pieces of legislation that have been lauded this year. I also say Representative Gramlich. Okay. No stranger to a fight. Also took on causes and turned them into conservative Republican causes. One specifically that he ran at the very beginning of the session that had to do with surrendering or being able to turn over a firearm to a licensed firearm dealer in the event of whatever, a house fire, a move, or, and someone called this like the pink flag law, or if there's something going on in your life and you need to hand that firearm over to somebody in the event that you just need to get your head clear. He passed that legislation with bipartisan support out of both chambers quicker than a hiccup. So he's taken an issue that anytime you talk about revocation of gun rights, which this didn't do, it just created a safe haven and then liability shield for those who are willing to help people out in their community. Take a problem that's a powder keg and then work to find a common solution that doesn't take away anyone's fundamental rights, which I clearly am a massive proponent of, while also trying to address the systemic problem we see in our communities. I think that should get a lot more credit than it has, and I'm really proud of the work he did on that.
Biggest myth of the Arkansas legislature?
That we're all on the same team. You don't have to be an Arkansas political historian to understand that we went from a unified government to a unified government with a different party. In the process of that, there are things that would naturally have to have occurred inside of legislature and outside of legislature in order to get to changing of power. We have a supermajority of 81 seats right now. Do I think we all work together at the same time? No. Do I think that our common causes should be the same? Absolutely not. I represent a unique and different subsect of people and constituents than someone in Southern Arkansas or Eastern Arkansas. But we all have to come home and answer to our constituents. So we're not all on the same team. We all have the same letter behind our name at a ballot, and we all believe in the same platform. But how vocal we get in that advocacy varies significantly.
Arkansas primaries, we basically went from the legislative session, not even an hour once y'all were done. I swear, I open up Twitter and it's like endorsement here, endorsement there. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, I guess we're in it now. Um, Primary season will be here before, well, we're in it. And we're talking term limits. Oh, I wanted to ask you, you ran a bill about term limits basically to provide clarity. And I know we need to wrap it up, but let's see, that was House Bill 1873, basically to notify the public to provide clarity on what members of the General Assembly are termed out, to provide the numbers that they've been in office, and just to say, okay, there's no ambiguity on who is termed out and these are the members that are termed out. That essentially got nowhere. And so here we are now heading into election season, and there's ambiguity about a few House members and where are they on how many years that they've served in the legislature, and can they run again, or are they termed out? And imagine if this had passed, we would have that clarity. Talk to us briefly about that, and then moving into the primaries, and maybe just kind of give us your take going into the primary season.
So House Bill 1873, I believe is the number.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a little bill I thought of just in the interim. I'm like, I understand our Arkansas political process now. I get it. I'm an active participant. I don't know at any given moment who's got however many years left. And we've gone far in terms of going from 6 years to 16 years back to 12 years. And I just thought that this would be kind of a common sense piece of legislation. The Secretary of State certifies our election. They give us a document literally on our desk when we swear in on the first day of session. And I thought, well, it wouldn't be very hard for them to just take a few moments and look at the registers of each General Assembly and determine how many years people have left of service. So all the bill would do would say, hey, Secretary of State, within 30 days of the certification of election, please notify every member of the General Assembly how many years they have left in their term limit. I don't believe that there is ambiguity in the process, but we have the plain text of the Constitution that says before a certain date, there are a certain number of years, and after a certain date, there is a less number of years for an individual's term limit. What people get caught up in is this cool-off period that the 12-year term limits are allowed for. So the bill was simply to say that in the event that a person who exceeded their term limit said, by God, I'm going to keep running. I'm either going to switch parties or I'm going to be an independent. To stand as a qualified candidate in the state of Arkansas, if you look at our Constitution, it has nothing to do with term limits. It has everything to do with your age, your location, your permanent address, in good standing. It has nothing to do with term limits. So, and the Secretary of State more or less affirms the applications of individual parties as you go through the filing process, or as an independent, the number of signatures that you have collected. Again, nothing to do with term limits. So a party or an individual could say, I'm going to submit what I need to. I'm a qualified candidate for office. And the Secretary of State, outside of an extraordinary action, would have to affirm that person's place on the ballot. And then my bill would be able to give a challenger to that person who's exceeded term limits the option to say, I have a public document that says they have 0 years left in their term limit. And then hopefully allow for lower courts, which often kick out political questions. They say it's not for us to decide, it's for the people at the ballot box to decide. The opportunity to say, that is correct, this person has exceeded time limits, please remove them from the ballot. So it died in the Senate, like a lot of legislation this year, but I'm optimistic. It is common sense. It doesn't. The good thing about this bill, it doesn't go after any one group. It's just pure transparency, and it's an attempt to say, why don't we have all this information out there for everyone to digest? Currently, it's somewhat of an honor system.
Yes, it is. And that in politics can be a little worrisome at times.
Yeah.
Oh, Representative McKenzie, I called both chambers and got a list of those who are termed out, and they're so wonderful there. And the House said, here's a list of those who are termed out, but there's some ambiguity on 2 members, and so we'll just wait and see. And I was like, well, that sounds promising. I guess we'll just wait and see. So it's too bad that bill 1873 didn't get anywhere, because at least there it would just, like you said, provide some transparency and clarity. But like a lot of good legislation, it can always come back again. And that's a conversation that I had with Representative Underwood, is that, there were some pieces of legislation that he had filed during the 94th, brought it back again, got it passed. And so, this is one of those that can hopefully come back and get passed. Anything else that I didn't ask, well, I did, and you didn't answer. Any predictions or thoughts about the upcoming primary season?
No, I said a few times during session, I'm not in the meteorology business or the predicting Donald Trump's business. I'm not in the business of predicting primaries. As a political candidate, I appreciate when people don't publicly make speculation on my races, and I'll do the same for others.
Sure.
But listen, I think we're on the tailwind of still transformative conservative leadership in the state,
Yeah.
as well as the country. And they have seen, they obviously supported President Trump in his November election. We have Governor Sanders, a conservative leader in the state of Arkansas. We have elected conservative leaders. We now need to enact conservative policies, whether that be, from a Doge style committee that goes and reviews state government in terms of waste, fraud, and abuse, or truly getting to a plan where we can lessen the state income tax down to zero. These are things that people have voted with their feet. They have gone to the ballot box. They've said, we want this. So in the primary season, I would suspect that we're going to see that same trend. We're going to see conservative leaders rise to the top. We're going to see an outstanding Republican turnout in another midterm primary year, because we have continued to elect bold conservative leaders at the top of the ticket and hopefully all the way down to the bottom.
And hope that they can deliver on those promises. So again, thank you for all the work that you've done at the state capitol. Really appreciate you coming on Conduit. I hope that you can join us again really soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jenny.